Welcome back, everyone, to Leadership with Purpose. You know, it's funny, we talk about all these big ideas and complex topics on the show,
We do.
but sometimes the most fundamental things, the stuff we do every single day, are the things we kind of take for granted,
Right.
like conversations. We have them constantly, but do we ever really stop to think about how we can make them better, more meaningful?
That's a good question. I think a lot of times we just kind of react in the moment.
Yeah, we just go with the flow.
Exactly.
But that's why I'm so intrigued by this book we're diving into today, The Next Conversation by Jefferson Fisher.
Hmm.
It really challenges us to rethink our approach to communication and understand how we can transform those everyday interactions into something more productive, even powerful.
I think that's a great way to put it, transformative. Fisher really makes the case that our conversations have the potential to be so much more than just an exchange of words.
So before we jump into the specifics, can you give us the big picture overview? What's Fisher's core argument?
Well, he starts by pointing out this almost universal tendency we have to be right, to win the debate, even if it comes at the expense of the relationship.
It's so true. You see it everywhere, in families, workplaces, even online. It's like everyone's just trying to score points instead of actually listening to each other.
Exactly. And Fisher argues that this win-lose mentality is actually incredibly counterproductive. It creates division, resentment, and ultimately prevents us from truly connecting with the other person.
Okay, so how do we break out of that trap? What's the alternative?
Well, Fisher proposes a pretty radical shift in perspective.
Okay.
He suggests that instead of focusing on being right, we should prioritize understanding.
Understand.
Yeah, truly grasping where the other person is coming from, even if we don't agree with them.
That's interesting. So it's not about suppressing our own opinions or conceding defeat,
Not at all.
but rather about making a genuine effort to see the world through the other person's eyes.
Precisely. And Fisher argues that this shift in focus can have a profound impact on the entire dynamic of a conversation.
Now, this all sounds good in theory, but how do we actually put it into practice? I mean, it's one thing to say prioritize understanding,
Right.
but how do we actually do that in the heat of the moment when emotions are running high?
That's where the practical side of Fisher's book comes in. He provides a whole toolkit of strategies and techniques for having more intentional and productive conversations.
Okay, so let's dive into some of those tools. What are some of the key takeaways that our listeners can start using right away?
Well, one of the most fundamental concepts is what Fisher calls framing.
Framing.
Yeah, it's about consciously choosing how you present a topic or initiate a conversation.
So it's like setting the stage for a more constructive dialogue.
Exactly. For example, imagine you need to have a difficult conversation with a coworker.
Oh,
Instead of launching straight into a list of complaints, which would immediately put them on the defensive,
yeah.
you could start by framing the conversation as a shared problem that you both need to work together to solve.
I see. So it's about finding common ground and focusing on collaboration rather than confrontation.
Exactly. And Fish gives a lot of specific examples of how to reframe common conversational pitfalls in a more positive and productive way.
That's really helpful. It's like having a script for those tricky conversations.
Exactly. And another crucial element is active listening.
Oh, active listening. We've all heard that term before. But what does it really mean in the context of Fisher's approach?
It's about going beyond just hearing the words that someone is saying and truly engaging with their message on multiple levels.
Okay.
Paying attention to their body language, their tone of voice, the emotions that are underlying their words.
So it's about really tuning in and making the other person feel heard and understood.
Exactly. And there are some specific techniques you can use to do that.
Like what?
Well, paraphrasing is a big one. Restating what you've heard in your own words to make sure you're on the same page.
Oh, yeah. That's a good way to clarify things and avoid misunderstandings.
Exactly. And asking clarifying questions is another good strategy. It shows that you're paying attention and that you're genuinely interested in understanding their perspective.
It's funny how such simple techniques can make such a big difference.
They really can. And Fisher argues that active listening is one of the most powerful tools we have for building trust and rapport in any conversation.
So we've talked about framing and active listening. What are some other essential elements of Fisher's approach?
Well, empathy and validation are crucial.
Okay.
It's about acknowledging and validating the other person's feelings, even if you don't agree with their viewpoint.
I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, especially in heated discussions. We tend to get so caught up in defending our own position that we forget to acknowledge the other person's emotions.
Exactly. But Fisher emphasizes that empathy and validation are not about agreeing.
Hmm.
They're about simply recognizing the legitimacy of the other person's experience.
So you could say something like, I understand why you're feeling frustrated, even if you don't agree with the reason for their frustration.
Exactly. And those simple acknowledgments can go a long way in de-escalating a conflict and creating a more open and receptive atmosphere for dialogue.
Now, another area that Fisher explores that I think is really relevant, especially in today's world, is the importance of setting boundaries in communication.
Oh, absolutely.
I think a lot of people, myself included, can relate to feeling drained or even emotionally exhausted after certain conversations.
Especially with all the online interactions we have these days.
Exactly. So how does Fisher guide us in terms of setting those healthy communication boundaries?
Well, he starts by emphasizing that setting boundaries is not about being rude or shutting people down.
Okay.
It's about protecting your own well-being and ensuring that your interactions are respectful and productive.
So it's about knowing your limits and communicating them clearly and assertively.
Exactly. And he provides a lot of practical advice on how to do that, how to say no gracefully, how to disengage from a conversation that's becoming toxic, how to redirect a conversation that's veering off track.
I love how practical and actionable all of this is.
It really is. It's not just theoretical mumbo jumbo. It's stuff you can actually start using today to improve your communication skills.
Now, one of the things that really struck me about the next conversation, Fisher argues that these principles are applicable in all areas of our lives, from our families and friendships to our workplaces and even our communities.
Absolutely. He talks about how these communication skills are essential for effective leadership, for building strong teams, for resolving conflicts constructively, for creating a more just and equitable society.
It's like he's saying that mastering the art of conversation is one of the most valuable and impactful things we can do in the world today.
I think that's a really powerful message, and it's something that I think we can all benefit from reflecting on.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways that you hope our listeners will remember?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important to let go of that need to win every argument.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our focus from being right to truly understanding the other person's perspective.
And remembering that understanding doesn't require agreement.
Exactly. We can validate someone's feelings without endorsing their viewpoint.
And we can disagree respectfully without resorting to personal attacks or insults.
Absolutely. And I think it's also crucial to remember that communication is a two-way street.
Hmm.
It's not just about expressing ourselves clearly, but also about actively listening to what the other person has to say.
And being willing to adjust our own perspective based on what we hear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, I think it's important to remember that mastering the art of conversation takes practice.
Like any skill.
Exactly. It's not something that happens overnight.
Yeah.
But with conscious effort and a willingness to learn and grow, we can all become more effective communicators.
So, the next conversation, as we've explored, is a powerful reminder that how we communicate shapes our relationships, our experiences, and ultimately our world. It's about being more mindful, more intentional, and more respectful in all of our interactions.
And I think for all of us who are trying to navigate this increasingly complex and often divisive world, that's a message that's more timely and relevant than ever.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day to day, think about how you might apply just one or two of the insights we've discussed in your next conversation. You might be surprised by the positive ripple effects it creates.
Thank you for listening.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to support the show and help us reach even more people with these important ideas.
See you next time.